Plus, Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, The Eye of Jupiter, MetaMagic of Battlestar Galactica Reimagined. I'm Jin the Ninja at Wukong Reborn. Oh shit. Sorry about that. I had my YouTube playing, and so I heard myself double up. My fault. My apologies. Still working out the technical difficulties. Of course, I'm joined tonight with, or by, no, with my co-host Solar Exile, who's obviously a co-host on Threshold Saints. He has 2 episodes upcoming, which are really coming. I've just I had like technical difficulties, but I really promise that they will be out on the 11th. His episode with CJ will be out on the 11th, so everybody can look forward to that. It's going to be a really good one. Deep Vajrayana. Um, Obviously, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all of our Grey Lodge episodes, all of our past lives. Speculative Anthropologies of Magic. That series will be continuing, but for right now, we are focused on what is, I think, it's definitely a Lodge favorite. And now, will it be a fan favorite? Like, obviously, my fingers are crossed that it will be, but we'll see. So I'll try and like do the best job that I can do, and obviously Joshua won't be here because he has some kind of, I don't know what he's doing. He's like on a boat race thing, but he actually has a lot of notes, so hopefully he'll be able to join us for part 2 and 3 on that. And of course, Eros up. Everybody like and subscribe to Eros's own YouTube channel. She's a great content creator as well as a fellow panelist on the Occult Rejects, and so we've actually done quite a few lives together on Rejects lately. So I'm going to let both of them plug whatever they want. Obviously, we don't record on X anymore, which is a lot easier from admin point of view. But I do still like what we used to say, which was, we come together through time, transcending time and space in consent. This is a metamagical, we'll call it a working group at Nexion. I know Solar will like that. Yeah, we're here to disrupt maybe a little bit, or just maybe be discursive on the Aether Wave together. So everything we say is speculative, obviously. And yeah, I think it'll be an awesome series. I've been looking forward to this for like 2 years. I've always wanted to do this. So I'm really excited personally. The inner nerd is compelling. Okay, Solar, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Eros can also introduce herself.
Sure, yeah. Solar Exile. Nothing to plug at the moment, although I am stoked for that episode of CJ to drop. We recorded that pretty close to when we recorded the Neon Tiger episode, and that was a really interesting, like, because for me, right, it was in like pretty quick sequence, and they're both sort of like deep Vajrayana cuts, but they go in very different directions, and I think it'll be kind of fun for people to see the sort of gradient that's created by those 2 episodes. So yeah, that was really fun. Both of them are really cool to be on. Yeah, you and I, Jin, also have to get cracking on some other stuff. We have to get back in the saddle for some other recording. But yeah, it's good to be back. Too many things going on. I don't have any. Oh, I do have a zine to plug, but all right, between us, I said I didn't care about too many things, and the editor center justified my poem. Uh, I'm not too thrilled about that. I will plug the zine at some point in the near future because I got a poem out. But yeah, happy to be here. Looking forward to this topic.
Oh, I'm so excited for you, Solar. That's so great. I mean, I always knew you were a great writer, and I've always said that. Like, you can go listen to shows like 40 episodes ago, and I'll have said that. But I'm excited that you're in a zine. So awesome. I haven't been recording. It's not, Solar knows this. It's not like I don't hide it. I'm way behind, and I've got a huge archive. So really, I haven't been recording. All my episodes are from that exact same time, in May and early June. So I'm just kind of cracking through them, and then once I start recording, of course, Solar and hopefully Eros will join me for future episodes. Eros also has her own episode, which she's waiting for me to drop on the Red Book. So my apologies for that, for the delay. But Eros, why don't you introduce yourself and plug whatever you want to plug?
Yeah, happy 4th of July, guys. And congratulations, Solar. That is really cool. I'm curious what your poem is about, if you would be willing to share anything at all. You can find me on YouTube at Eros Up, and you can find me on Twitter at Eros to Ethos. yeah, that's all I have really to plug, but should be fun.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. Obviously, I'll plug. Sorry, Eros, did if I cut you off, totally my bad.
No, you didn't. I was laughing at my awkward introduction. It's always awkward every single time. I can't fix it.
It's always awkward. I even feel awkward. So, and I've done it a million times, but you know, and doing it on YouTube is a little different. It feels less you know, fly by the seat of my pants kind of thing. But I kind of like it too, because it kind of gives like an order to the chaos, as we often discuss. And obviously we have a fourth co-host. Yes, Joshua the Branch. He also has an episode. I sound so behind. He also has an episode on Dark Souls upcoming on Threshold Saints with Seth at Bibliomancer. So it's like a part 2 to their very well received episode on Gnosticism, the Gnostic sort of thing in Elden Rings. And I will say that Solar's episode with Neon Tiger, that actually needs a part 2, and Tiger did ask about that, so I will get Crocolakin on that eventually in the next 2 weeks at least, figuring that out. But yeah, I have to say it was also well received. So I just want to shout out that episode. People, I got a lot of feedback, positive feedback on it, and I don't always get feedback.
Awesome.
Usually people say nothing. So
especially that episode too, that because that was a little bit, I don't want to say like, you know, kind of like technical or niche, but that was a very like Jin episode in terms of like the sort of the very unique corner of things that you know you have on the market, right? So it's really cool that people engaged with that. I was hoping they would, not because I was on the episode, just because like Neon Tiger brings a very like distinct particular perspective that interfaces that like you guys can do a show that I don't know that too many other people can do a show on like similar topics like that. You know what I mean? It was one of those that like I was really excited to just play any part in like bringing that information like out into the sort of like media space, right? Anyway, I'm really not plugging it because I was on it. Like it's a dope episode. I'm glad to hear.
I'm glad you're on it. I'm glad you're on it. I really was, because I actually set that up so you could be on it. I'm not just saying that for that, like because we're recording. I wanted you to like hear me be discursive with someone who's like even more advanced. Not that I'm not that advanced, but someone who's more advanced than me. And so you could hear I'm not like always like I don't always tell you the wrong thing. I actually have like dharmic intentions most of the time. So yeah, no, I thought it was really cool, and I'm really glad you joined me. We also have the episode with Brian Gaffey coming out, and that's going to be really sick, but that won't be out for a couple weeks, so I'm trying not to say anything about that. But yeah,
right on.
Okay, we got lots. Solar's got lots. I've got lots. Eros has got lots. So Battlestar Galactica Reimagined. I know multiple people in the lodge privately message me more support for this series in particular than anything that we have done in terms of like what people said about how excited they were. So I hope that I can carry like in the episode, at least my portion, all their hopes and dreams, and make sure that it turns out really fucking cool. So we can't say fuck, because obviously in the show they always say frack. So I thought it'd be funny if instead of saying fuck, not that we say that often, well I do, but I'll try and say frack, at least for me, so everybody can say what they will or what they want, but I'll try and switch that out. So do either of you want to introduce anything about the series, or like your reaction to it, or how you interpreted it or engage with it at the beginning? Or do you want me to? Which is fine either way.
So I am very comfortable in this role of being the sort of the little kid that's being led along like into the experience. I'm watching it for the first time. I'm all of like 3 episodes in, right? So I can be the one to whom your like basic explanations are directed, you know? That works. It won't be the first time. So
all right. Well, Eros, do you want to give any thoughts on the series? Have you seen it before? Or is this your first viewing? Or have you not seen any episodes, which is obviously okay. I never assign homework, even the books. You know, just give anything you want. If you don't want to say anything, that's okay too.
The only Battlestar Galactica I've seen was like when I was a kid. So like I don't remember a lot of it. I think that obviously right now with all the like alien discourse and stuff like that, you know, I think that's kind of what it makes me think of mostly. Um, yeah, I don't have much to say about it.
Solar, I see you unmuted, so please, I'm not trying
Oh,
to.
I mean, no, man. I've been unmuted consistently.
Oh,
Just
okay.
yeah,
Okay. Sorry,
yeah.
I just noticed it. Well, I did want to shout out one thing because I know for a fact that because JRJ, Jason Giorgiani, tweeted about this, this was kind of, I had always planned to do a BSG episode. It was always my dream, to be honest, because I think this is a really interesting series. I think it has the 1978 series is obviously extremely Mormon, like it's Mormon slash or X Book of Enoch, like in totality, maybe a little Scientology thrown in. But this series is definitely, it has something for like the Aryan bros, like it's very dense in the sort of like, I would say a pseudo Vedic cosmology. It has a lot of stuff on the Olympians. They are the primary names of God or names of the gods in the series. So it has a lot of Hellenic material. And it's also, their religion is also, I would say most, it's at least superficially has like Greco-Roman elements. So I think that's also really interesting. But sorry, to get back to the point about JRJ. So he tweeted about this. I immediately to our magicians group chat because I knew that if Solar saw that JRJ had tweeted it, that means that I could do a series on it because it actually gave it some weight. So I was like, fuck yeah, we're doing it. So also he would watch the series basically if he said it, not me, right? But like if JRJ said it. So I
You're so
definitely was,
ridiculous, man.
I know. But anyways, so that was the genesis of the series. And yeah, I honestly I was really excited. I'm just a huge nerd for this series. And I think I was like in 8th grade when it came out, 2004. Must have been like 8th grade or 9th grade. So I was like a kid. So I watched at least the mini series. And then in first year university, there was this place, it doesn't even matter, but I rented the DVDs and anyways, I like watched them all and was like totally enamored with it and was like, what is this? Because I didn't really know. I didn't really have like a Gnostic or Mormon background of anything to like compare it to. I knew a lot about the Vedas from cultural things, but I didn't have any I mean, magic wasn't unfamiliar to me, obviously, but it was like newer. I was like more of a noob at that time, definitely young. And so, but it stayed with me. And I think that what Eros said about alien disclosure is accurate. And I think that's also why JRJ retweeted it, like in seriousness. Like I was joking before, but in seriousness, I think it actually relates a lot to disclosure and to sort of something we've explored as a group is like this perennial Gnostic story. I don't like perennialism, but it kind of fits for this, right? Because they even call the sort of samsaric cycle of the show the cycle. And obviously, resurrection, or as I would call it, a rebirth or reincarnation, it's like it's an axial point of the whole. I mean, the series doesn't work without the idea of it. So, and of course, it even opens with everything that has happened before will happen again. So say we all. So that's sort of where I am at in terms of the series. What I particularly like about it, and I thought we would discuss Cylons like at least give an introduction to the worlds, to what's going on, pretty much cover the mini series in this one, at least just give people like a background because there's obviously going to be people, Zillennials, Zoomers alike, who are in our group who will be listening to this who probably have not seen it either. And so I feel like at least give them a little background, little taster of what this is. So you have a group of 12 tribes of Kobol who, through some kind of ethno-religious, I guess, scriptural they go through like an exile. I'm not just saying that as a pun. That's what it says in their scriptures. So they are 12 tribes. There are 13, but the 13th tribe, it's a question of who they are, and it's even a question of who the 12 tribes are, because the 12 tribes take on the name of the 12 tribes from the scriptures, but they're actually probably not related to them. And the series pretty much says that. It's pretty definitive. And you have a mixture of very literalist interpretations of scripture, and you also have more more magical, more esoteric, more mystical, experiential sort of interpretations of it. So it's a diverse landscape, and the religion is not identical from either colony to colony or person to person. It tends to be individuated in interesting ways, I think. And one of the ways the series does it, at least the 2004 series, is they do it by colony to colony. So they don't get super deep into this in the primary Battlestar series, and I've never seen the spin-off Caprica series, but also filmed in Vancouver. But they get more into the kind of cultural differences, religious tendencies of each planet, and like the sort of politics and how certain planets, which are all named after stars. And so this is actually something I wrote down. There's something really interesting about this. It reminded me of a book of Enoch 3, excuse me. So Enoch 3 tends to preface the asterisms, which is something that we've as a group often discussed. It comes up very frequently, like this sort of contemporary preference for the planets, especially in esoterica. I tend to feel, this is just me, Jin, like I'm not saying this is definitive, just speculative again, but in my opinion, I tend to feel like there is a particular emphasis placed on the planets, however you understand that, whereas in the contemporary occultism. But traditionally, especially from a tantric perspective, we would always preference the asterisms. This is also true in Taoism, and it is actually true in the Vedas. The planets are really the lower devas. They're not put down. There's multiple times where they are mentioned as being celebrated as Indra, as whatever, or in the retinue of, or like as worthy of worship. I think there's a line in the Rig Veda about this, but they're never really characterized or anthropomorphized like to a high degree. They're just sort of minor characters. So you can see that there is a consistent reoccurrence of the asterisms, who often get positioned as the consorts or female deities, female divinities, who are not really well explored in and of themselves until much later. But I do think it's interesting because it is kind of a story that comes up. Now, the 1978 series does preference the planets a lot more. They tend to place a higher emphasis, which does more correlate with Book of Mormon, at least the sort of parts I've read and that I understand. Whereas the 2004 series tends to really look at the asterisms, meaning like the zodiac, because that's what each colony is named after, like Sagittarion, Geminon, Libron, Virgon, Erelon, Tauron, etc., etc. Caprica, of course. And Caprica, obviously, interestingly, ruled by Saturn, is the primary world of the 12 colonies. So the 12 colonies are these sort of exiled tribal people from this planet Kobol, which is where they dwelled with the gods. That's what the scriptures say anyway. And so there are kind of different ways that people understand this. Later on, and yes, there will be spoilers, but later on, this sort of gets understood as perhaps these were human Cylon hybrids. So this kind of fucks everything up in a way, because it positions the humans as like, who are the humans and who are the Cylons? Because the Cylons are sorry, Solar, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, no, I don't know how to throw a hand up for this, but I wanted to, before you move past the sort of planetary versus asterisk emphasis here. Because as you know, everyone in the chat knows, I've been kind of going back through a lot of like alchemical material, kind of like revisiting it, but also sort of reintegrating it with a sort of Gnostic approach, right? Which also makes sense in terms of lineage. So do you think there's anything interesting kind of going on? Because a lot of the like traditional Hermetic sources are going to have a lot to say about the planets, among other things, as being these kind of these phases or states that have to be sort of walked in reverse, right? So they kind of take that Gnostic idea of, you know, planets as planetary intelligence, as these kind of archontic, um, you know, energies, let's say, but they're saying, well, actually, we're trying to sort of like walk that path of return. And in fact, like what we see is you have to kind of go through and progress through these kind of like stations in the ascent, right, which are mapped to planets and operations, you know, magical operations, etc., or things that need to be sort of like integrated, right, into the sort of like ascending, whether you want to say spirit or soul, whatever. So you're going to have like the seven spheres, and then beyond that, the sort of the hidden, the secret eighth thing, right? There might also be a secret ninth thing too, but the eighth thing is usually in the traditional text the fixed stars, right? And also like if for a lot of the texts that come a little bit later that posit sort of two sets of seven, right, that sort of mirror each other, the boundary point would be that transition from the planetary to the like astral or the stellar, right? So do you think that sort of this remix that seems to be happening in the show based on your description? I haven't actually gotten to the colonies in my watch through because, like I said, I'm 3 episodes in, but sort of making the planets or you know like the naming the planetary systems after the stars, like it's kind of like mixing up those ideas in a way that seems fairly intentional. And I'm wondering, like, is there anything to that, or and like what's kind of going on there?
Well, this is a great question, I think. Obviously, you always ask great questions, but I think this is a great observation because they have to leave the planets within the first 3 episodes, or at least after the miniseries. They're basically the only time you'll see the colonies is in flashbacks, at least at this point, but there is a quote unquote return with a V that does happen for multiple characters and multiple story arcs. So I think you're right in saying that it's mixed up because I think that they are leaving you know this, Solar, but I always say that I think the planets are sort of Klopothic or Yetsuhara trap, as was viral on Twitter. Like I actually agree with that. There's something that makes sense to me about that. Um, I do like the Sefer Yetzirah, so again, this kind of does make sense to me. I'm not saying that this is how people should necessarily view it, but for me, it makes sense. Um, I think that the leaving the planets, and I think that humanity can be likened to the stars. I think this is a lot more in keeping with sort of their neo-Gnostic or neo-Mormon or neo-Vedic or whatever you want to classify it as, or like a sort of Gnostic Hermetic blend, which is more how I see it. Um, I think it actually makes sense because the ships become the actual homes, and this is a point that is made in every single season. And it's well, this might be jumping ahead too much, but it's in the finale in season 4, it or season 5, I can't remember, but they basically they discuss this, like where is the prime ground or the primordial ground. Like obviously I'm using a very kind of dharmic term, but it's not quite the way they explain it. But yeah, they're talking about like the primordial return to the Terran, the earth, the actual earth that they arose from. And excuse me, I have the hiccups, which always happens. But they basically, the progenitor of all humanity is a human Cylon hybrid named Hera. So I found this interesting because Hera is also often likened to a star. And she is the obviously wife of Zeus, who is Jupiter. Well, is equivalent to Jupiter, at least we'll say. But the name Zeus is extremely important. It's obviously the name of this episode. I think the planetary elements are the stuff that the civilizational things like the creation of the sort of government in exile. They even call it that. They, the colonial fleet government, they set up a quorum of 12, so very Mormon, or very like ancient Hebrew also. You know, they have 12 sort of priests. They're not priests, they're secular, but it's similar, and they each represent the colonies, each of their individual distinct colonies. And there are multiple coups that happen, like military coups. There's a sort of Cylon terror, like I guess like a jihad against the colonial government. There are multiple like religious extremists. There's anti-tech extremists that attack it. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think that the human elements are the planetary sort of forces at work, the things that are trying to keep the humanity stable in a way, but also keep them sort of tied to the very recent traditions. Because as we learn from the flashbacks and from people's sort of backstories, the Confederation is only recent. It's only 80 years old. It's only in the post first Cylon War, first Cylon Human War. So basically, we should start there. So there was this human doctor invented the Cylons, invented the robots, and he, interestingly, his name was Dr. Greystone. I didn't realize this until I was researching for the episode, but he invents the Cylons. They're silica based, but they can't really be distinguished, at least the human models. And they basically rebel against humanity. The slaves rebel, very Spartacus, and they sort of commit to a genocidal overthrow of the human slave system, and multiple planets, like which are named after the asterisms, also take this opportunity to sort of overthrow their colonial overlords, which are like the richer colonies like Vergon, Libran, Caprica, and Leonis. So there's definitely like a hierarchy of both stars and planets at place. And you can see like in the natures of each colony, which again is not really well explored in the first, in the series, at least in the main, even in the five full seasons, or the, I guess season 4 had 2 parts. That's really what I'm talking about when I say season 5, but it's like season 4.5. It's not really well explored, but once you start to understand the lore, it actually makes sense. They are using like zodiacal and planetary archetypes to sort of describe the civilizational models and environmental and maybe geo-ontological manifestations of each planet. So I think, and it also is replicated. Like the series is, in my opinion, deeply metaphysical. Like going back to your point, Solar, it's deeply metaphysical, and everything is corresponded like with intentionally. So even the ships that come from certain planets, or certain colonies, they will have elements of not only the civilizational quality of those colonies, but they will also have environmental qualities. Like there's a, I can't remember what it is. It's like a botanical garden ship, and that comes from, I think it's from Libron, which is like or Vergon, I can't remember, but it's a jungle. One of the worlds is like a jungle world, and so they have this kind of like ship that's like a huge, has the specimens of every plant in the 12 colonies, whatever. And so there are elements where it reminds me of all the planets, but there's a quality where the ships are transient and they often get destroyed. So this kind of goes along with the idea of like self-combusting stars in a way. And obviously the number of humans continues to dwindle. So we start off at like 51,365, something like that. And then it dwindles down to in the 30s. So this is like humanity's last stand, and by the time that we end up at the finale, they've decided to abandon the colonial model. So in my, like if I'm looking at it through like my kind of like K-ball remix way, I would say that they're abandoning the idea of the planetary densities at that point, and they're embracing more of their destiny as stars. That's how I would read it.
One thing, what I have to ask, because you were mentioning this Hera figure. which again, I sort of want to ask our resident Platonist, right? So how are we doing in terms of like the tiers of emanations, right, in various systems? But I need to, before that, get a clarifying question. You said that that figure was a sort of human Cylon hybrid, but then elsewhere you were saying that, this Dr. Greystone sort of invented the Cylons as robots. So I must have missed something, right? Um, what it so yeah, could you just like clarify? Because it seems to me like the second thing, like the Cylons, they were invented and then they rebelled. So where is this like hybrid idea coming from? Is that just something? Yeah.
Okay, so this is a great question, and this will be revealed if you choose to watch, if you will, to watch more of the series. Obviously, it will unfold for you, like this sort of idea, and it's never neatly resolved. That's one issue I had with the whole series. That's kind of neither here nor there, but he often leaves metaphysical questions like very ambiguous. So if you understand sort of their religious framework, and interestingly enough, Eros did have that tweet about Geminis. Um, so the Geminis are the most literalist of all the religious people. They have the most priests are Geminis, and a lot of the scrolls are written in old Geminis. This is like a big deal throughout the series, partly because of their religious conservatism, but also because they sort of control the priesthood and how the scriptures are interpreted. So once you start to like peel back the layers or the husks of their sort of literalism, you start to see that actually the scriptures are talking about the story that has happened 80,000 years ago, 80 years ago, and right now. The cycle is always continuous. That is kind of the idea of Battlestar. It is a very Samsaric series in a way. Like, yes, Dr. Greystone did invent the Centurions, who are the mechanistic Cylons with they're called chrome skulls. I think that's what the humans give them some like name, sort of derogatory name, but it's like fear and respect name too. But so yeah, he does create the Centurions. The Centurions then rebel. They go off into this other part of the galaxy, another star system. They supposedly invent the human models. That's how most people understand it in the first 2 seasons. Then everything shifts because we're revealed to that there are actually human model Cylons living among the humans already. And so are they possible are they capable of intermarriage? Well, the question is yes, or interbreeding, yes. And so and even to distinguish between them is very difficult. Like there's only one test. They use plutonium, which is obviously interesting. If you use my Yetziradic framework and say Pluto is death, I think that's a interesting idea, but I digress. So they do some kind of plutonium test, which is able to see if there's trace silica in the bloodstream, which is the only way to really distinguish between human and Cylon. So Hera is born from Hilo and Athena, which I always found interesting just in the names alone. Obviously, Hera is also the mother of the gods, also like wife of Zeus, as I said, but she's also the daughter. She's like the progenitor, the Eve figure. And they even relate this idea of like the Eve figure as Hera several times. So I would say the idea is like there's no real origin point. It's like a recycling of the story continuously. And so there's a lot of ambiguity as to where the specific origin point is.
So I sort of have another follow-on question. Again, I've gotten like little hints of some of what you were saying just in the first few episodes, trying to piece it all together. But I don't know what the narrative equivalent of like mise en scene is. But the show it unfolds itself in a very like like this. We're already at a somewhat advanced point, and you're supposed to kind of backfill lore as you go, right? Which can be a little bit frustrating, right? But it's a choice, right? So is there because at this point it seems like the Cylons are a very, very advanced form of intelligent life, right? To the point where their human infiltrator models are like capable of proceeding more or less undetected and things like that. Um, is there this sense that they were at one time a sort of more maybe primitive or like there are certain stereotypes in media about robots where you basically robots are this kind of like externalization of certain rationalistic quote unquote like mechanistic tendencies of the human mind or the psyche that then get kind of externalized like onto entities, right, which are only that, and that allows us to kind of appreciate the contrast, right? Like what's left over, like what separates the human from the super advanced robot. Data, right? Star Trek, right? Is the capacity for emotions, perhaps, and even just like the something about something really vague, like the human spirit, at least in the kind of Western popular, you know, like conception of things. Um, is there any sense that Cylons think or sort of like in like genuinely different ways than humans at this point, both either at the point that the show kind of begins or maybe at an antecedent point in the narrative, even if it kind of happens off screen? Like were they like bleep bloop clankers that became sort of, you know, like that overcame their sort of rationalistic bounded, constraints or whatever? um you know how it's similarly, and like just to kind of give a pop culture reference point for this in contrast, like it's emphasized in the Matrix trilogy. I haven't seen the later one, but the core three of them, right? That like even the super like advanced kind of algorithms of the machines, like the architect, for example, are still kind of like they're cold, they're super logical, they still sort of retain that like machineness to the way they think, even if they're hyper intelligent, and you know what I mean. I haven't quite got a bead on how the Cylons are supposed to be and how I'm supposed to like interpret them as a viewer situated with, in a sort of Western pop culture sci-fi context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's a great question. So the Centurions in the 1978 series are clankers, like 100%, but they have higher intellectual functions. Like they're equivalent to humans in their minds. But then there's like an introduction of like aliens and like all this weird stuff. We won't get into that because there's nothing about this in the Reimagined series, which I actually appreciate about it. So the Centurions in the 80 years ago in the first Cylon human war, they are only Centurions. There were no, well, we find out later that there were human models in the colonies already. But as far as humanity knows, the Centurions are they are the Cylons. At this point in their sort of evolutionary history, they do have higher intellectual functions, emotions, all everything. They basically are humans, but what happens is because they're mechanistic, is the human Cylons, like the what are called the hybrid models, or they're numbered 1 through 8, although there are only 7 primary models, because the Daniel model was boxed. That's what it's considered. We can get into why that happened, but anyways, they get the mechanical Cylons, the Centurions, and the Raiders, because the ships are biomechanical as well. They have some kind of like implant that the human Cylons put on them that inhibits their higher intellectual function as well as their ability to resist orders. So even though like the mechanistic Centurions created the human Cylons, as far as we know at this point, the human Cylons turned around and basically sort of re-enslaved them. Is basically what happens. So the human Cylons, as a point of differentiation from the humans, like you were asking, like what is their sort of like point of being? They are radically monotheistic. in a culture that is obviously extremely polytheistic. But it's not really polytheistic. It is actually Platonic. That is more what I would even say for the series. Like, I would actually reject the idea that the series is explicitly polytheistic. I know this is going to be contentious for people who are listening who are more oriented to that worldview, but I would say it's Platonic because the deeper that you understand the on-screen religion, it's not literal. Or the gods could be said to be archetypes, or they could also be said to be human Cylon hybrids, which would have enhanced strength, ability to resist diseases, much longer lifespan, and also the ability to resurrect. So this is a very, very important point of differentiation. When a human dies, as in the real world, they're gone. Like, well, we don't know, basically. But in the Cylon world, all the Raiders, all the Centurions, and all the human Cylon hybrid models, they actually are almost instantaneously resurrected through this spectral network, we'll call it, that they're connected to these resurrection ships. So anytime one dies, no matter how they die, unless it's like in certain conditions, and this becomes a plot point later on, like what are the conditions that they will not reincarnate? Because it's not all the models think this is a desirable outcome. But for the first 3 seasons anyway, this is the primary outcome of any Cylon death. So they remember their death, they remember how they died, they remember why they died, all their memories are intact, and they have a degree of relationship with their other models. So we'll use Caprica 6 because she appears the most in the miniseries. She's like the first Cylon we're even introduced to, the human Cylon hybrid model. And so she actually is one of the more interesting characters because she is deeply religious. So she actually is the vehicle for a lot of the sort of on-screen theology in terms of monotheism. I don't know if that answered your question, Solar, and you can.
Yeah,
Okay.
it did. It did partially. Also, too, again, I have no idea what I'm talking about since I'm 3 episodes in, but so the show is very squarely, at least so far, grounding itself in how do I say this? In a late 20th or very whatever, the early 21st century conception of enlightenment liberalism, right? Would truth, democracy in the American way kind of shit, right? So the 3rd episode is the prison ship little situation, right? And Apollo basically has his I serve the Constitution and we're a democracy and all this. He has his little great in time for July 4th. He has his little America chimp out thing. And everyone walks away respecting his principles, and he read the banned book of the terrorist, and what it's like classic, right? It's very much Sammy Sosa walking up to the plate for late 20th century Americana schlock kind of shit, right? And so for me, not that most people on the street think this way exactly, but to me that harkens back very clearly to the sort of well, it doesn't matter, to the French Revolution, right? I know America comes first chronologically, but the sort of the French Revolution is kind of the logical sort of historical dialectic expression of those ideals, right? And it's kind of this definitive moment in the history of Western political and intellectual life. There were a lot of different spiritual ideas getting thrown around in the tumultuous years of the French Revolution, right? One of the, they basically invented multiple versions of a French paganism, or a rationalist Enlightenment paganism, right? That were interesting, some of them more than others. But to me, there's this kind of throwback feeling to the again, 3 episodes in, we're not getting a lot of the deep lore. Like, I have absolutely no idea what Jin's talking about with respect to like the Gemini scriptures and shit, right? That's cool. I'll look forward to that. But because we're getting this lip service to some kind of pagan polytheistic something, especially with Apollo, right, the god of many things, but like, again, this sort of like the enlightened, deified, like, reason, right, the sort of like light bringing figure. To me it's this like very, very like direct evocation of a specific, like, yeah, like, like 1790 uh like French paganism, which is kind of cool. Like, that's not something that is brought forth so directly anymore in pop culture. So I'm enjoying that. Also, it kind of makes me laugh because of what, like, Richard Spencer is up to with the Apollonian thing these days, right? So it's all coming together. But anyway, I look forward to being sort of like proven wrong in that that's not the direction, apparently, that they go with how these people express their sort of religious, spiritual, and cultural ideas in form. But anyway, it works for right now. So
Are you talking about like Leibniz and
it
like
could
the
be.
monadology?
Well, yeah, I was actually like hoping to hear from you. Like, my question was going back where because I'm interested in Hera. Hera isn't a figure that I've encountered as much, but I'm not the expert in the different kind of like systems of emanations, right? So I was curious, like, how does Hera like substitute into the mix with, like, Rhea and Persephone and like the normal, like, I don't know, like, different. I'm sure there are probably multiple sort of schools or systems that included Hera as like a, with an elemental attribution and kind of this and that. So I was hoping like maybe you could make sense of
Yeah.
that for me. Yeah, that's kind of what I meant with that.
No, I thought when you brought up because originally you had talked about how like there's this idea of going kind of reverse through the zodiac and like the old alchemical texts, and it just made me think of like Hercules, and Hera is very uh, instrumental in the story of Hercules. Actually, she is considered the mother of the stars because of that story, where she's breastfeeding Hercules, but Hercules is a bastard because Zeus had him with a mortal woman. And so she's breastfeeding Hercules, and like some of the milk spills out, and it creates the Milky Way. And but she hates Hercules, and so when he is like a baby in his crib, she sends this serpent out to get him, and he rips it in two. And then his whole story is basically these trials where he's going in reverse through the zodiac, which is really interesting because the only thing that really does that naturally would be the north and south node, which travel in reverse. Like travel retrograde normally, whereas usually planets only do that every so often. And it's just interesting too, because he rips that serpent in half, which kind of just indicates like this willpower kind of over your fate, working in reverse through the zodiacs. And her parents were Kronos and Rhea, so she's technically a Titan, which is, I guess you could say above the gods. They're more maybe pure source, because a lot of the gods kind of emanate out of those. They become necessary out of those, like emanating out of those principles, you could say. And so her dad being the chaotic potentiality, fertile sky daddy, and then Rhea being the kind of chaotic sensory Mother Earth. You know, a lot of their kids were pretty terrifying, or like, you know, you have the Titans, but you also have all of the chaos monsters. You have that a lot of which Hercules fights, but then, you know, the big chaos monsters too, like Typhon, for example. I don't know if that answered any of your questions, but I think it's also really interesting that, like, this, you also brought up kind of the difference between machine and humans, and that just feels so significant to humanity right now with AI, and like there's a real push and pull between like spirituality and technology right now, and that's also represented in the stars with Jupiter opposing Pluto, Jupiter in Leo opposing Pluto in Aquarius. So I
So
just think
I
it's so fated that we're talking about it right now.
Yeah, that's dope. Can I ask a follow-up question for that? So I feel like in the scheme often gets simplified, right? Where you have like Hercules presented as this initiatic figure, prototypically because he is both God and man, right? So he's presented, and again, this is like across systems, right? In the kind of classic like mystery school context, Platonic context, Gnostic context, Hermetic context. He remains this like the prototype of the initiate as this demigod, as this hero, but the point you raised about the titanic ancestry of his divine parentage is actually really fucking important, right? Because and it's which is funny because you encounter this same kind of motif, but like less clarity because of the nature of the sources in the northern mysteries, like in the Germanic context. But let's stick to the Greek. So I was wondering if, yeah, like what do you make of this? Because if like the divine in this case, so he has the mortal parent and the divine parent, but the divine is split between, as you said, the titanic and the Olympian, right? Which can represent different interesting nexuses of ideas, of concepts, and potentially of like, sort of like metaphysical principles, while at the same time, famously, right, we have these kind of like intermediating figures, that are, so someone like Prometheus, right, who is also going to be like really important in, um within the concept of kind of like mortal man's initiation, right? He's a titan, but he sides with the Olympian gods. He like betrays his own for the sake of, his own kind of ends, but then he also sort of like betrays those gods to bring fire to man. So it's kind of like linking, it's again, it links man with the titanic aspect, but at the same time it sort of that link, or that sort of series of actions, series of choices that are made there, give man the potential ultimately to sort of seek after his Olympian, truly like divine, if you want to say solar nature, etc., something like that, right? That's a really interesting and confused broth we've got going on there. So yeah, if you had anything more to say on that.
I mean, I think that sounds about right. I think you have it exactly right, especially where Hercules, kills that serpent or breaks it in two. To me, that really is symbolic of man having power over their own fate. And obviously, I mean, you master your fate and you kind of start controlling your own causality. That's the greatest will that you can have. And in a way, I think that it's in Platonic thought, you would say that in fact we have more will than the gods, just we have more free will, whereas the gods are more well defined. We're more complex consciousnesses. Um, So yeah, I think that is the point that's being made, and also the fact that it is a Titan and an Olympian is quite representative of humanity as well, because we have the intellect to be a lot greater than our human nature, but we also have that human nature. Um, so we have that Titan nature roots and the more divine roots, and it's a marrying of those two things in how you reach rubedo.
I was gonna let Solar respond if he wanted
No,
to.
go for it, man.
Thanks, Eros. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, no, I mean, I think you're both totally right. I think that is like I think that's what the story is saying. I think it is about the synthesis. I think Hera represents a very solar figure in a way. And I know we were talking about Hercules. Interestingly enough, in the later seasons, so this is sort of a spoiler. So I think everybody listening to this has probably seen it except for Solar and Eros. Um, but they'll get there, hopefully. But the figure of Starbuck or Kara Thrace, in my opinion, and also the way the story, the narrative unfolds, she is the most like Hercules of all the characters, and her own parentage is very ambiguous, as is later revealed. She could be the daughter of Leoben. I know we have Frau Blucher, who is a big Leoben fan. I'm also a big Leoben fan. And interestingly enough, a lot of the names are Hebrew Georgian composites. Obviously, Leoben is a Georgian name, which is obviously kind of, I thought Gurdjieff, but I wasn't sure. But you could also interpret it as like the son of the lion. I think that's like an accurate way, because I don't think they were doing like particularly like concise syncretism. I think they kind of left it very ambiguous. So
Vibe-based syncretism is
yeah,
probably the
but
best
yeah,
syncretism anyway.
correct. Well, I mean, that's yeah, definitely we can make that argument. I'm gonna have to add Eros back, but I don't know how I'm gonna do that with my mouse the way it is, but we'll try. Sorry, Eros, if I don't add you back right away, I'll try and fix
So
it.
while he's doing that, I wanna make my
Okay, go
appeal.
for it, Solar.
I turned to the camera and I addressed the audience directly.
Okay.
I it would be really like, you don't have to commit to like a permanent mic slot on these. I would just love to hear from people. Either, I mean, Frapluch or whoever, but like these people know more than like I do, right, as a host. If people just want to like come up even just for a little bit and be like, hey, like, share that information, I would just welcome that, like, I'm not trying to be a chaos goblin on the space and add all kinds of people or whatever, but I would just hope if there's like any little, fluttering in your chest of like, I might have something to say that would be interesting, not necessarily like right now for this show, but just in general, like you'd consider, just like coming out, talk to you and be like, hey, I have some takes about Battlestar or whatever, like come up on the next episode, like it would be really fun to hear from some of the people who we've known in chat for like a number of years at this point, which is crazy and awesome, but like I've never heard your voice and we've never, gotten to engage in this form. That would just be a blast. That's all.
Okay, still haven't fixed my mouse, so apologies, Eros. I will get to it. But I want to say, like, that's why I've been posting the StreamYard links in the GC. It's simply because I want people to, like you said, like it's not like the spaces where it's total chaos. Although we kept, I mean, we kept it pretty contained, because I'm like a little bit of a authoritarian like that. But sometimes anyway. But I think you're right, and Vanessa knows that she's totally welcome to come up, and Frau Blucher or whomever. And so I think that the point of doing the BSG series was to give people like an opportunity to talk about a popular neo-Gnostic, Neoplatonic manifestation, sort of vibes-based syncretism, as you very well said. You know, I think that's what it is for. It's a more it's we usually go deep wisdom science, and this is deep wisdom science in a way, in its own way. But I also think that it's accessible. So I think that was sort of the point, was to
Yeah.
give
So,
people the platform.
so I'm just gonna throw something else out there while you continue your eternal war with the mouse. It's on the topic of war and sort of genocide. So there's this interesting little bit of dialogue that just kind of like it's like a smash cut to a scene non-linearly, where these two sort of human Cylons, that's what I'm going to call them, they're having this conversation, this kind of like glib, like evil villain framed conversation anyway. That's kind of how it's portrayed. And they say like, well, humans are our parents. And then the other one's like, but your parents have to die for the child to come into their own, kind of thing, right? Um, and obviously this tracks with the trajectory of like certain Greek paradigms, right? Like some Kronos has got to go kind of thing. But I'm sort of wondering, like, who in terms of the factions, right, of humans and Cylons, even though the Cylon situation seems to be a little bit complicated with their internal sort of caste system that seems to have happened. um why why do they perceive each other as existential threats, right? It seems that they have some kind of faster than light travel. They're jumping, right? So the whole universe is their oyster. The humans are pretty badly beaten, seemingly, right? They're just trying to get away, at least as far as I've gotten in the series, right? Okay, so you've got this kind of refugee convoy that's just trying to get out of harm's way and fuck off to who knows where, right? The Cylons are clearly on the upswing, right? It's clearly their galaxy to dominate. Um, it's unclear to me why they both see this as like a war of extermination, especially because from the human perspective, and again, I understand the humans, at least at the start of the first season, are not shown as being the power players, right? They are in the defensive position, the receptive position, if you will. But since their framework, like ideologically, philosophically, is still fundamentally like late 20th century America. The Cylons are clearly like capable of participating as like fully sentient agents, right? By this point, they're not robot slaves, they're not Roombas, right? It's just kind of unclear to me. Like it seems like you could very easily make some kind of accord with these people. Um, and the Cylons would know that, right? Because they're clearly like, they have infiltrators. They sort of understand humanity and sort of how humanity is thinking at this point in time. But the Cylons are like apparently like, no, these fuckers got to go, or these frackers got to go. So yeah, like, what do we get a sense of why that is? I mean, I understand needing to wipe out your enemies, but that's kind of like, you don't have to sell me on that. But it just seems like it's taken for granted that there can be no accord between these two groups.
Okay, so there was an accord at Ragnar Station. Interesting name. That happened after the first nuclear attack by the Cylons 80 years ago in the first human Cylon war. So in that accord, it said that they signed a non-aggression treaty, so they will not attack each other. The humans will not pursue the Cylons, because the humans really did win the first war. And so the Cylons say, okay, we're going to go, pursue our destiny, our manifest destiny. And the humans say, okay, well, we won't pursue you. So they have this out of the way space station. That's actually, I think it happens in the first sequence of the miniseries, is that Trisha Helfer, who plays Caprica 6, a human Cylon hybrid, she walks into the station with 2 Centurions. There's a guy stationed there, obviously just waiting for his bureaucratic retirement. And they don't think that the Cylons are going to show, because they haven't in the last 80 years to renegotiate the treaty. So basically, they end up on the station, they blow it up. Cylons, of course, reincarnate, resurrect, the human dies. And then that is sort of the first first declaration of war, and then the nukes start going off in all the capital cities and all the planetaries. There's both planetary nukes like that the Cylons have obviously set in the sort of defensive and in the underground parts of the city. And then there's also like ship-based nuclear tactical nukes that they bombard all the 12 colonies with. So I think that the Cylons regrouped and were like, we have to annihilate our oppressors. And this is obviously mirrored or paralleled in the scrolls. The most discussed gospel is the scrolls of Pythia, because this obviously plays into something you actually mentioned before, which was like the kind of liberalism redux. Yes, Lee or Apollo, we'll call him Apollo, his call sign's cooler. Yeah, he is like the naive lawyer. That's basically what he has got major daddy issues. He has major I can't remember if his older brother died or his little brother. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. He has a brother who sort of is a character that lives in their memories. Like it's like a fracture point in their family. So he has like all these issues with his dad, who's obviously the admiral or the captain of the entire colonial fleet. He is the ace captain, but he also is, yeah, he is kind of like idealistic. Interestingly enough, the guy who plays the terrorist, Tom, he was the original Apollo in the 1978 series. So you would only know that if you're like deep in the lore. But I always thought that was really interesting because it kind of like, one is like the extreme of like, we must do things in this orderly by the rules, like there's room for democracy, there's room for discourse. And the other one is like, no, we need radical action, radical revolution. And it comes out later that Tom is actually one of the liberating forces of the planet Sagittarion, who were they were partially enslaved. They were kind of like they weren't slaves, but they were kind of like indentured servants to the other
Okay.
colonies. So he kind of liberates them, and then he takes on all these other causes like prison abolition and union organizing and all this stuff. He actually
Yeah,
becomes
okay,
part of
which
the core. Okay, sorry,
I
sorry,
have to
Solid.
no, I have to say the whole like political thing, and I don't want to just drag it back to that kind of stuff, but it's very disorienting, right? Because you're presented with the sort of like fleeing remnants, the shattered like exiles of human civilization fleeing through space, and then like in this episode that I just watched, the president, Madame President. She's like, well, we need the prisoners to do this kind of dangerous thing, but they're not slaves. They're free men. They have to choose to do it. And it's like, ma'am, excuse me, everyone here is quote unquote, like no one is free. There's no getting off the ride. Like you're in a functional war band, right? Like, yeah, I guess you could like quote unquote elect a leader, but there's no like, oh, I'm gonna sell the surplus value created by my labor for 8 hours a day, and then I'm gonna go home and I'm a free person. Like all of the, the like paradigmatic assumptions of like liberal humanism are completely out the window because you're literally on a spaceship, that's like running away from like robot Genghis Khan in space. Like it's very weird, right? Like what does it mean to be free in this context versus a slave? Like again, like are you paying the like staff officers, and the enlisted men, like, the cook, like can the cook quit, from the galley in the spaceship? Like I don't think so. What does the labor market look like for the recently, quit cook? I don't know. It's very bizarre. So it's to me, it's like one of these things. But again, maybe that's kind of the point, right? It's like that's part of their mythology. That's part of their religion, functionally, like civic religion. And so they cling to the forms, they cling to the framework, even though the actual like emergent situation is completely incompatible with that, right? As like an act of faith, in the same way that like I don't know, you see that like people will sort of recreate the forms of civilization on like a desert island, right? If they're like marooned or something like that. Um, which is, always amusing or heartwarming or whatever, depending on your interpretive frame. I do think so. I'm getting a sense that the Cylons perhaps are a little more tapped into the sort of like recurrent nature of this conflict and struggle. Like, okay, because I don't want to frame it as like Gnostic versus Platonic, right? But it kind of seems like the the Cylons actually have a bit more like Gnostic adversarial, like kind of an orientation, right? They're like, you can't make an accord with the Demiurge. The Demiurge fucking sucks. Fuck that guy, or frack that guy, excuse me, right? And so they see a peace treaty as like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, right? Like this is a thing that's going to buy us between X and Y number of years, and we're going to use those years to optimally prepare for war, which we are then going to hopefully launch on our own terms, right? It's not actually a peace deal, right? They don't see peace as being like conceptually, like ontologically possible with humanity. Which again, if we're mapping this onto spiritual frameworks, that is kind of like the Gnostic orientation, right? There's no peace with this world. You are in a state of kind of constant war or imprisonment or whatever, right? Whereas the humans seem to have a little bit, as you said, either you can frame it as archontic or a little bit more, they sort of like want the status quo. They perhaps naively, whatever, thought that peace was possible, right? They didn't see this as like a zero sum war of annihilation, right? And that's to so I don't know if that tracks like with the trajectory of the show, but that is just kind of interesting, right? Like if you want to understand that kind of core spiritual orientation, how that would translate into like policy prerogatives, right? The Gnostic robots are just like their only option. They can lie, right? They can stall for time, but in the end, it's genocidal war of annihilation, right? Omnicidal war of annihilation, right? That's the only play.
Well, that's the only play right now, but that's not necessarily like the.
Either I just dropped or Jin dropped. Eros, can you clarify?
Oh,
Is that better?
he muted himself.
Ah, okay.
There. Oh shit! I'm so.
We can hear you now, but you
Okay,
just
well-
you kind of muted on a trailing thing.
Yeah,
so
I
it sounded very-
apologize.
I know it's funny.
Doubling
It sounded you just disappeared into like the K-hole of your own speculation, just gone from the universe.
Okay, well, so I think the one thing I want to say, I'm gonna have to shut this window. Sorry. Okay, can you still hear me? Or
Yep.
no?
No, loud and clear. You're good.
Sorry, Solar. Say that again. I had the tab muted. I'm just.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
And welcome,
Apologies.
Tristan Dice. Welcome.
Yeah.
Vanessa.
Hey, Vanessa. What's up?
Hi.
And I want to apologize to Eros too. Like I figured it out, like how my mouse works, I guess. But so I apologize for leaving you. Wasn't intentional, of course.
No need to apologize.
Okay. You know I'm a little bit of a retard with technology, so everybody knows. Okay, so what you said, Solar, was really good, and I won't do like a trailing or meandering response. But I think one thing is you're right in your diagnosis that the Cylons have a very Gnostic. Yeah, they're very Gnostic. But the one thing that they have is that they believe that God is. They have a direct personal relationship with God. So this was a really interesting at the time that the show aired, because obviously this was like post Iraq, like post Bush, kind of like post 9/11 era, and there was that kind of like extreme rise in evangelical and like prosperity gospel, sort of charismatic Christianity, Christian Zionism, whatever people want to call it. And so at least the Caprica 6, she feels like she's directly tapped into God. Now, we find out later when we're introduced to the other Cylon models, which again, number 7 or 8, depending on how you resolve that. But each Cylon has a sort of different cosmology and maybe even a different theological standpoint. So, which you could say is very Gnostic in a way, because it's like very disparate. It's not um, it's not coherent necessarily, but they definitely believe in direct revelation. They are fractured, like Frau Blucher is saying in the chat. They are fractured in ideology, and it is between, like, there's literalist factions, there's an atheist faction, which sort of is like God is not really real, but it's more of like an idea, but it's not platonic and like a some kind of greater or higher thing. It's kind of like well, the Cylon human hybrid number 1, he's the most atheistic. And but he's also a religious fanatic, which I always thought was really an interesting dichotomy. Like, I thought, well, they're making this guy like a crazy preacher, but once you like yes, Dean Stockwell, Brother Cavill. So he is a religious extremist, but he actually doesn't really even believe in God. Or he does believe in God and he hates God. So he definitely has like a very demiurgic relationship with their cosmology. But then there are others, like again, Caprica 6, she's a great example. So one thing I think is really interesting that also corresponds to like Dharma or sort of like maybe Central Asian, more Gnostic ideas, is they have this idea of projection, meaning that they can project their world distinctly with their minds. So I always thought that was really interesting. And they say that that's directly interrelated to the deity. Okay, Eros, take over for 2 minutes while I respond to anything you want to respond to. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I have to open another window. My apologies.
Okay. Where'd Solar go? I think it was interesting though what Solar had asked about you know, if the robots were more Gnostic than the humans, and how there is like it would make sense that robots were more anti um, materialist in a sense, um, because they don't really have sense in the way that humans do. But maybe these ones do. Maybe these Cylons, it just made me wonder what kind of sensory experience they have. Because, your sensory experience is going to determine a lot of how you relate to your will. And if something's more machine-like, then, I would think, first of all, it would have less of a will because it has less desire. But again, I don't know what kind of sensory experience these Cylons have. And I also was wondering, because they're named Cylons, it makes me think of Cylon, who killed all those Pythagoreans, and I wonder if there could be a parallel there, because obviously the Pythagoreans were, they had their unique idea um, of the universe, which then, kind of did get brought into Platonism. And a lot of people say Pythagoras is like very numerical and stuff, but I don't know. There is some dispute there where people say that the numerical stuff comes more from this other guy that I can't think of the name of right now, but Pythagoras was more, the actual Pythagoreans would have been called, what is it? acousmatis, and the more numeric people were more mathematai. So they were two separate groups of Pythagoreans, and they didn't necessarily consider the math type actual Pythagoreans. But then, that also ties into Apollo a little bit too, because they had, some even believed that Pythagoras was like incarnation of Apollo. So yeah, I was just wondering those things. If the Cylons are sensory, how does their experience differ from humans? Then just also, do you think that there could be a relation between Cylon and then the Cylon that killed all the Pythagoreans?
So absolutely yes. Because sorry, it's echoing for me. Just give me a second.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I just wanted to do my check
Yes.
while he's gone. Thanks.
Hey. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. You're good.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, look, Eros, that
Stream
kind
now
of
just being a little bad.
yeah, long time listener, first time caller. Eros, that your point, what you were talking about, kind of brings up Solars from the beginning. Do the Cylons feel? And especially if we're talking about the mini series, I think that you get brought on really quickly when Six is on Caprica and she's looking at the baby, and she seems really curious about human life, and even the way she talks to the architect or whoever the guy is, the maker. As it goes on, you start to realize that maybe she has these questions and is feeling this way. And Boomer also shows early on, when she first becomes a Cylon and doesn't know it, or does she know it? And she has to make the decision. They're trying to find water for the colony, and she finds it, but her Cylon side is like, no, you can't tell them. But I think something breaks through and she does tell them where the water is. So early on, you're kind of faced with this polarity of, yes, they can, but they're also very much not able to. So I don't know, that was my thought on that.
No, that was great, Vanessa. We'll wait for Solar to come back, but I'll respond to exactly what Eros said. So Eros, yes, I think you directly, like without even viewing the series, I think you totally nailed it. Like there's a Cylon human hybrid called Deanna Beers, and so they call her the Deanna model. She's number 3. So obviously this is significant for Pythagoreans. She's very obsessed with the numbers. She's a very analytical person. She's not like a lot of the Cylons have very mystical experiences. They're very deeply connected to so let's talk about sense perceptions, I guess. That's a good sort of entry point, and you also brought it up. Like, what do the Cylons experience that is different? So as I said to Solar, that they believe in like a direct mystical experience with God. They consider it a monotheistic being. There are obviously, each of the Cylon models have different ideas of what God is. It's very clear once that starts to get explained. Deanna is a questioner. She's kind of a horrible person. Like she's not necessarily a person, but she's extremely cunning and like cutthroat. That's her nature. So, but she does have mystical experiences, and she starts to actually experience like a prophetic shared vision with other humans and with other Cylons as well. So that's also interesting. So I sort of meandered on that point of projection, but it's the ability for Cylon minds to envision themselves in a sort of parallel dimension. It's best explained through Gaius Baltar and Caprica 6. So in the first 2 seasons, Gaius Baltar is only able to see Caprica 6. He's the only one that can see her. And so he doesn't know if he's going crazy, or if she's like an implant in his mind, or if she is like an angel or a demon, and maybe both. Maybe she's a daemon. Maybe that's actually a really interesting way. And I would actually say that probably that was what Ron Moore intended, was to show her as more of a Hellenic sort of style of a daemon. So I think that that's interesting. So they experience sort of like a meta reality. They're able to project like their environment differently. This is part of why the Cylon ships are so sterile, because they have such powerful mind, like their mind powers or their psionic powers are so strong that they actually can see different environments. Just in the sort of like the very sterile ship, they actually are able to project, which is what they call it, the projection. They actually can project different things. So she actually, sometimes you'll see her at the aquarium. She's like walking through the hallways of the ship, and it's an aquarium, or she'll be looking out the window of Gaius Baltar's house, which got blown up during the nukes on New Caprica. But they can see it, and so she brings Gaius into these kind of altered states of vision or consciousness, and these kind of, they will have dialogues, very very interesting for from a tantric perspective, because this is what the Skywives are said to do, is they have dialogues with the people who are sort of practicing their ritual sadhanas. So she basically has theological dialogues with him in his mind, but then we find out that actually Caprica 6 is real. She's herself has been experiencing the, we'll call it the daemon of Gaius Baltar on the ship. So independently of each other, they are both having sort of demonic manifestations that are largely of consciousness and of the mind. And then so I think that's really interesting. And so the other thing is they are able to experience the full range of human emotions. Not all of them are individuated. There's a model, number 4. He is actually the most mechanistic of the human Cylons. He does not individuate himself between his clones. So his character is the same. Basically, any model that you run into that looks like him, it's the black guy. He is exactly the same. He's like cold. He's very clinical. He has really no capacity for higher emotional thinking or higher emotional reasoning, which proves to be his downfall. Interestingly, just like with Brother Cavill, number 1, and his kind of like atheistic daddy issues, his hatred. He hates the Centurions. He hates being alive. His actual whole thing is that he wants to sort of be liberated from meat space, and he does not want to. That's part of why he hates God. He hates resurrection or reincarnation technology, and he's a very antinomian sort of figure. Whereas Leoben, so he's another maybe possible Pythagorean figure. He has very deep mystical revelations. He's a bit of a prophet as well as a trickster. And so why is this important? Because in the later seasons, I think it's in season 3, there actually is a Cylon civil war. Just like you were talking about with like the different warring Pythagorean and Platonic groups. That's exactly what happens. Certain theological tendencies become allied with each other. The Centurions take the side of Diana, the Capricas, Athena models, which are number 8, and Leoben, and they go to war against the Brother Cavils, the number 4s, and also the number 5. Sorry, I was looking at my list of like the Cylons with their numbers. So the Aaron model. So he's the least explored. He doesn't really have a theology. He's the least spiritual of all the Cylon models, and he does definitely not care. So he takes the more like I guess he's a very like he's kind of like a cockroach figure. I guess that's how you could sort of describe him. He will survive no matter what. That's sort of his worldview. So he takes like this antagonistic view. The Centurions don't want to be enslaved by the human model Cylons. The mostly the women Cylons and Leoben agree that this is a very bad idea to enslave them, because then what separates them from the humans? Like they're no better than the humans. And Caprica even says this. She says, we're no better than the humans if we enslave the Centurions and the Raiders, who are capable of higher like emotional and intellectual functioning. So I think that, and they also are able to experience more degrees of the spectral ray. So this is something that the Centurions in particular and the Raiders, the mechanistic ones, are able to experience more degrees of light. They don't necessarily see like humans see, or they don't necessarily um, have the same sense perceptions as the human model Cylons, but they are able to experience reality in a particular way. And they're also capable of projection, but they're not capable of projection with the restraining collar or whatever thing it is, a bolt or whatever it is. So I think that that's also really interesting. But yeah, there's the Cylon Civil War. There's the raging theological tendencies. The antinomians, you could say, they take the position that the Centurions should be enslaved for all time, never to be, that the human models are superior, and the other rebel faction, which is exactly what they're called, take the position that actually we need to ally with the humans, and even though it's fracked up, and sort of liberate both of our species and put an end to the genocide. I know, sorry, Solar. Yes, the genocide does come to an end at the very conclusion of the series. Sorry, Vanessa, go for it.
I know. I was just gonna say it's a shame that he left or had to or whatever, but he had been talking about Hera, and remind me again why he brought it up, because the cyclical nature of the show.
Yeah, I mean, that is it. Like, for me, Hera obviously is very Aeon of the daughter, even though, as Eros and I said, it's like she is the mother of the stars, but she's also the progenitor. She's the Eve-like figure of mankind. A mankind, but she's a human Cylon hybrid.
Well, I just found it interesting because, you know, he doesn't know about the Hera character that appears later. And so
right.
I just found that very interesting.
Well, you know, obviously she's also Eurasian. So that is obviously interesting to me right away. And also that Hera does not necessarily, I mean, you know this, Vanessa, but she doesn't necessarily experience reality in quite the same way.
Correct.
She's kind of like in a midway between the Cylon projection theory of consciousness and the human like interiority. But she never really has like great emotional reactions to things. She's much more Cylon in that way. She's much more contained, as Eros would like. That's a great word that I learned from Eros. She's much more contained. She actually doesn't show that much emotion. She clearly has emotion. I'm not saying she's like a sociopath or something like that. I'm just saying that yeah, you know, I mean, you've seen it. So she doesn't react in the typical ways like a child would react to anything, whether it's the bombing on New Caprica or the, you know, when they land on that temporary planet with the LJ planet and they sort of form a temporary colony, like when that camp is getting raided by the Cylons or when they're under Cylon occupation, she does not have the typical reactions. And the Centurions, actually, this is really interesting. The Centurions, the mechanistic Cylon beings, they recognize her as a sort of like a savioress in a way. They do. Like there's a point where one of the Centurions looks at her. He does the red eye, and sort of like there's like a computational recognition, I assume. And he kind of ignores her. He kind of like recognizes her, and then he kind of like is like, oh. And so this is one of the first sparks of where the Centurions, who also have theological questions, as it's revealed in this part of the season, they actually have their own cosmology as well. So it's not just the human Cylon hybrids that have like unique Gnostic cosmologies. It is also the Centurions and probably the Raiders, since they're entwined with each other. So, and it revolves around Hera. It revolves around this little teeny girl, this little girl that's like 8 months old to like 2 or 3. And she is like the daughter of the sun, Helos, and Athena, wisdom. So I don't know. It's like, and Helos is interesting because obviously there's a Helos Apollo connection, like in terms of octave of like, I don't know. Eros will know a lot more about this, and Solar obviously does as well. but I don't really know about this. But from my limited understanding, Helos at least in the series, he functions as like the much better person than Apollo. Apollo, like Lee Adama, he's very flawed. Obviously, if you watch the series, you'll realize this right away. Well, with at least within the first 2 seasons, like he's a great character. I'm not putting him down or anything. I think he, like the actor Jamie Bamber, I think he does a great job. But I do think he's like one of the most flawed characters. I think he loves the idealism in himself to point out the flaws in others, but and like to think, oh, everybody's like capable of change, but in the end, he seems like he's the least capable of change. He kind of is limited by his own idealistic tendencies. And it's also interesting, and it is unfortunate that Solar dropped because obviously Captain Adama is kind of fascist. Like maybe not fascist as in like like an early 20th century German, Austrian, whatever kind of fascist, or even Mussolini, but he is like, he says he wants a military dictatorship. It's very clear. I mean, Vanessa will know this. It's not just me pulling it out of my ass or anything. It's just, he says, like, at several points, him and Saltai, they discuss the possibility of a coup many times. They even try it. And yeah, so the politics are so much more deeper than I think I even relayed at the beginning. And it's like, that's why the series is so interesting, because there are multiple manifestations of like reactions to liberalism, as well as like these kind of counter politics that manifest. Like there are like I said, there's jihadi elements, there's like these terrorist things that happen, there's these there's these pro-Cylon terrorists that say, oh, we want peace with the Cylons, we don't want to fight them. And then we find out that actually that whole radical faction is backed by the Cylons. They don't know it. They're just pawns. They're just instrumentalized for this Caprica 6 model who hates humans. But anyways, no, I think that it's so complicated. And I think that that is one of the best parts of this whole series. There's so much meat there. It is like reading a Gnostic or maybe a Hermetic or Neoplatonic, like Neo-Vedic kind of rearrangement of these cyclical ideas. Vanessa, back me up here. So I didn't say anything like too uncanonical.
Oh no, 100. The Captain Adama, he does seem very fascist, but at the same time, it's like anytime you watch a military movie where it's the end of the world and it's kind of this exact situation, civilians and military, and you have a president that's trying to lead but has no idea how to do anything, yet she is the power. You're always going to have that military guy that's like, we need to take over. And that's kind of what Captain Adama, especially in the beginning, reminds me of.
I have a question. So it seems like there's this hierarchy kind of powers based off of intelligence almost, or like this hierarchy of life forms almost, right? Because clearly there's a huge distinction between them. And so that's kind of interesting. I'm wondering, like, obviously humans play an important role in that, right? They're the ones that created the Cylons. But they're also, in a sense, the most existentially fragile. And I'm just wondering, like, is there ways that the humans are more powerful and then ways that the Cylons are more powerful? Because up until now, it just kind of sounds like the Cylons are mostly powerful and like the humans aren't so powerful. But I would imagine there probably is some special strength of the humans that is probably kind of spiritually significant.
Absolutely. if you don't mind, Jen, this brings up something that
Please go ahead. Sorry, Vanessa.
yeah,
Oh,
no,
totally.
this brings up something that I wanted to bring up anyway. But right from the beginning, they realized that they can time travel through space to a different, portal jump or whatever, and the Cylons would follow them. Well, they figured out that the Cylons would follow them exactly 33 seconds later. And when I first watched this show years ago, I didn't catch that. But now watching it again, I'm like, oh, okay, great. 33 seconds. That's highly spiritual in every way. And the humans picked this up. And so they were able to stay ahead of the Cylons. Nobody slept forever for a long time until they figured something else out. But that just brought that up in my head when you mentioned how are the humans more powerful. I think they learn, they adapt, and spiritually, yes, for sure, it all comes into play. Jin.
Yeah, that was that episode of where the 33 minutes later, that is a great example. Because I was even thinking that. I was like thinking of Callie and Galen on the deck, like having to fix the Raptors. So to answer Eros's question and why I'm bringing this thing up that nobody's going to know except like hyper nerds like us, Vanessa, is that the humans have a resilience. They have resilience. They have a lot more spiritual capacity. I know I just went on and was like, oh yeah, the Cylons experience direct revelation from their god. Maybe it's the god. That's a question that's posited throughout the entire series. Is the Cylon god the demiurge? This is directly asked by Leoben when he's on the station, the armament station in the nebula. He doesn't know, and Deanna doesn't know, and none of them really know. And so Caprica 6 would say that the Cylon god is actually the true god. And he's a jealous god, meaning that you're not supposed to worship the other gods. So I think that's really interesting because she actually has the most radical break from her fundamentalist ideology in the first 2 seasons, and she actually becomes like much more Gnostic. And they actually have a kind of Aeon of the Daughter religion in the end, where they are like, we need to rescue Hera or liberate Hera or whatever it is. So why I'm saying this, Eros, is because the humans don't have the religious neuroses as badly as the Cylons do. And the Cylon religious tendencies tend to lead them into a kind of religious psychosis, if you want the truth. I'm not saying it's all wrong, and I'm not saying that they aren't having mystical experiences. They are. And it's also conflated, it's like sort of mixed in with their ability to do projection, like their ability to change their outer environment with their own minds. Because that, to them, especially like when the 6 talks about it, that's also partly their experiencing God. Like she says that to Gaius Baltar. She says projection is our way to like experience the divine sort of nature of the world, like how much we influence it with our consciousness. And he doesn't really get it, even though he's like a PhD in like 50 things. He has like 5 PhDs, and he doesn't really get it at first. But then he becomes a kind of Charles Manson, like funny enough that you brought that up a little earlier, but he becomes like a Charles Manson figure, like a cult leader. And they go and live on this like I guess black market ship within like this sort of holding bay, and he has like a harem of women. And he leads like sermons that they broadcast on like this shortwave radio that transmits throughout the fleet, and people's like begin to become like very drawn to them. And why I'm bringing this up is because the humans don't necessarily have a fixed cosmology either. Like but they're also a lot more flexible. They're a lot more flexible. You see, when they're on the Algae planet, there's a prophet, and President Roslin, who's also herself a prophet and also experiencing like very deep mystical revelation, but she's not really a religious person. So to give her the revelation, she doesn't really understand it. She misunderstands it, actually. She thinks it's about her, but really it's about the story of humanity. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But she goes to this prophet, and the prophet is I think she prays to Hecate or she prays to Kali. I can't remember. But both of those characters, there's a moment where you see like Hecate as an important figure, as well as Kali is mentioned, at least mentioned, or some iconography is shown. So there are more deities or more names. Maybe this is a more interesting way to think of it. There are more names than just the 12 Olympians. So I think that because of that, they're able to sort of find the path, the marga that works for them, rather than the Cylons who have a very fixed monotheistic cosmology where they they only worship one god. They believe that their god, at least the outer presentation of their religion, is that their god has chosen the Cylons as his chosen people. The Cylons are the special they're the special snowflakes of the multiverse. It is there. It is through God's grace, and Caprica 6 even says this, I think almost verbatim. She says, through God's grace, we have been granted stewardship over humanity, meaning that the Cylons will then be agents of God and decide if the humans live or die. And it's explored whether the humans are even virtuous enough to warrant compassion from God. And this is also interesting because you sort of see that their idea of God, like she says, okay, our God is a jealous God, and you must say like he is our salvation. It's very much like Pentecostalist, like very much like it's like almost one to one. You can see he's writing it like right from the Iraq War. At least that's how I understood it. But then she kind of, and it's several other Cylons as well, they shift in their opinions of God and they say, oh, actually, God is love, God is compassion, God is like more fluid than we had interpreted. They go from like a very fundamentalist Christian or Islamic, because it depends on the model, right? Different models have there are different worldviews. And of course, we're saying it's broadly Gnostic under an umbrella of broad Gnosticism, and it is. But you could definitely classify certain epistems into either fundamentalist Christian or fundamentalist Islam. There's definitely both tendencies among the Cylons. But then they sort of go into this more mysticism. And when they go into the mysticism, they actually begin to realize that the human scrolls, the human stories, the sort of Lords of Kobol, which is the name of this entire series, not this episode, but the like will be the name of the full 3 parts, that it's actually not bullshit. It's actually their story too. That's what's really interesting. The scrolls are about the Cylons as much as they are about the humans. And then you come to the paradox where what really is a Cylon and what really is a human, because perhaps the humans are actually, the humans in the actual show are descended from a human Cylon hybrid. That's one of the ideas that's posited.
Hmm.
Sorry, Vanessa, go for it if you need
Oh
more.
no, I was just saying, that was interesting. But it did make me think. I can't quote you exactly, but you were talking about how 6 had stated that it was their mission. They were sent there to see if the humans were able to be a part of their system or whatever, if they had it in them. And I think that's why she is so curious and asks so many questions of Gaius, and even questions his feelings. This goes back to Solar's original question. Like she's very in Gaius's head, like literally, but for herself as well. She's trying to figure out humans in a real way, not just, oh, are they worthy? Are they not? And I think that's how she comes to another conclusion in the end. Well, as it goes on, how it shifts their beliefs. But I just find it interesting that from the beginning, she's just very questioning of how they feel and why they feel and things like that.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and I didn't know if I should say it, but I'm going to say it now that you brought it up. The female Cylon human hybrids are by far, even though, yes, I said Deanna's a big bitch, and she is, there's no question about it. and even Caprica to an extent can be rather difficult, but and Boomer is obviously horrible, but Athena, who is not Boomer, and the eights who are also not Boomer. Boomer is kind of like she individuates herself by becoming bad. That's kind of the sorry, spoiler. That's kind of the end point for Boomer. But the other eights and Athena, they have even though Athena is not necessarily, she's the least religious in a way, but she says that she does have a deep faith in God, but she keeps it all inside. So it never really explores like her inner theology. And she doesn't really she doesn't get into deep theological discussions about it. But she actually says at one point, like, I believe in God and he's really important to me, or the idea is really important to me. And then she starts to see maybe the divine spark exists in her daughter. Again, it is interesting from like my perspective of like doing the, Aeon of the Daughter stuff, is because the series kind of reinforces a lot of my ideas. I didn't really realize it, maybe until more recently. But yeah, I think in terms of Caprica 6 and her sort of questioning of the world, I just think that the female Cylons, they have a much deeper connection, and we're never given the resolution of like what happened to Daniel particularly. Like, we know Brother Cavil poisoned the amniotic fluid so he can't be resurrected, can't be brought back to life. So that whole line, that's how it's even explained. The line of Daniel is dead. I wonder though if, because of their resurrection technology, if partly his inclination for prophecy and for our art and for a kind of deeper creative relationship with a deity or source, I wonder if like the other Cylons in sort of inherited it. It's sort of implied that that is what happens. They are always like, well, what happened to Seven? What happened to Daniel? And they're like, we don't talk about that. But obviously Deanna is really like, it's a big question for her, that she feels like she needs to uncover it. She doesn't really understand what's going on. She's like very much, she's very Machiavellian in her ways, but even her, as I said, they all start to experience these, like, whether you want to call it mass psychosis, which it's obviously not, because the Cylons can project any reality they want into the outside world. So it can't just be something, it has to be something beyond them. Really. So anyway, no, I think the female Cylons are much more attuned to sort of mysticism and like deeper spiritual connections. That's my opinion. I don't know. Either of you can agree or disagree, but I think it kind of goes along with like how we've discussed in chat. Like, women are more closely tied to the Sephira, and they're able to sort of intuitive, like Eros and I, and also Vanessa were just discussing this, I think yesterday or a few days ago, very recently. Just like there's an intuitive impulse to women's, not all women, this is not true for everyone, but I think for the most part, there's women who are interested in wisdom science, there's a much more intuitive nature to their relationship with it. And I think that this is also plays out very much in the series.
Yeah, 100. I agree. I had something for Eros actually. So are you there still, Eros?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So as you can tell, I know you haven't watched it, but it's like deeply seated in Greek mythology. And so, and I said Captain Adama earlier, and I meant Commander when you were talking about fascism. So Solar was also talking about there's this prison riot, and the leader of the prison riot is a terrorist, and he gets Captain Adama, the commander's son. He has him hostage, and he's kind of just drilling him, talking about Apollo, huh? And he's like, oh, it's just a call sign. He's like, yeah, but you're the son of a god. Aren't you a god? And I was just curious if you wanted to talk on Apollo and if you thought it had anything if you had anything to offer about that, because Apollo is the son of the commander in this show, and that is his call sign. Not to put you on the spot, you don't have to say anything at all. I was just curious.
Well, Apollo is a lot like Hera, where he's the son of Zeus and the Titan Leto. So, I mean, I guess when I think of Apollo, right, because I know Jen earlier was talking about the difference between Helios and Apollo. Apollo is very much like a archetype of Leo. But even then, that's not necessarily perfect, but I just mean as in he is expressive and related to music, prophecy. But I think that a lot of people do misinterpret Apollo, and I'm not sure if this is one of those cases, but people like to treat Apollo almost like a Dionysus like character. But he's really not. He would be like opposite of Dionysus. He's a solar god. He is an ordered god. There are things that can be maybe detrimental to order, right? Like when things are so you can become blinded by purity, I guess is the way to say it, but it's hard without knowing a lot about this character to make any parallels. But so you're saying that his dad is the fascist kind of?
In a way, yeah, you can say that, but I mean, what you said was kind of right on. Even though you haven't seen it, you kind of described his character very well, right?
Oh,
but yes,
interesting.
his dad is the commander of the fleet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it is interesting because I would say that probably the negative side of order and that solar principle is going to be kind of that stiff gosh, what word did you guys just use? Like fascist kind of attitude. Fascism is pure solar order.
So I would say that admiral or captain, he becomes admiral later. That's why Vanessa and I are like confused on like how we should label him, because he's like Captain Adama, and then he becomes, which is obviously an interesting last name from a sort of neo-Gnostic perspective, because it speaks to like the Adamus or the Adam Kadmon. The father, like Captain Adama or aka Admiral Adama, he has a Saturnian element, but you're right, he also has a solar element. He's both. And Apollo, like you were saying, Lee, whose call sign is Apollo, he's obsessed with purity culture. Like he's not a Puritan himself. And he's actually, like I said, he's very flawed as a person. And even in his idealism, he's flawed. But one of his main flaws is the fact that he has very Manichaean, to bring up something you and I have been discussing, Eros, but he has a very Manichaean way of viewing the world. And he doesn't necessarily even hold himself to that standard, but he holds everybody else to it. Everyone else should adhere to Lee's ideals, and that is the way the world should be ordered. But he is actually so flawed that he has a hard time connecting. He doesn't really see himself. He's not really compassionate, actually. He thinks he is through idealism, but he's actually not. He has like some kind of inability to empathize. Not necessarily like a sociopath or a psychopath. It's not really like that. It's more that he's so narcissistic. And I don't even mean about his looks or about who he is, but there is a little bit of that too, for sure. But it is really more about like I am. That is his sort of, if you want to give him like a conceptual tiferatic, like to go along with that solar nature, like he is like the ego of the whole series. And he really resists he loves the transgressive, like you were bringing up, like how people conflate Apollo and Dionysus. He loves the transgressive in terms of ideas, but he loves things in the specific colonial order as he recognizes them. He cannot really exist outside of the framework. Like Solar was saying, like there's a very like he grandstands about like, oh, ma confederation, ma constitution. Like that's how he is. Sorry,
I
Eros,
think-
go ahead.
I guess the big difference there would be Apollo is, I would say, probably one of the more empathetic, um, maybe gods. I don't know. Not to say that most of them aren't, but he falls in love with that nymph Daphne, and he allows her autonomy, which is a pretty big deal. And just kind of well, she turns into a bay laurel tree, but still he accepts her autonomy, and he almost kind of cherishes it. Like the bay laurel becomes precious to him, and it's like he honors autonomy in a sense. So that's probably a big difference there, but that is, I mean, super interesting because that is, yeah, what you would see as a danger of being too in that ordered solar world, is just being too militant on purity and stuff like that.
It's really interesting that you said that, and I'm sure Vanessa's thinking the same thing. You clocked him really good with that analogy to the Greek mythos, is that he actually falls in love with like we'll call her speculatively an angel. She's probably a human Cylon hybrid kind of thing, like but not necessarily first generation. Anyways, we'll get into this more in the Arrow of Apollo and the Tomb of Athena episodes. Exactly. Frobloker got it. This makes me think of Starbucks autonomy and how Lee responds to that. Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. So he falls in love with her. She's kind of an untamable character. And interestingly, she actually carries on the Apollonic qualities much better than he does. She is the wielder of the arrow of Apollo. She actually returns back to the colonies, the nuked out colonies, to retrieve the arrow of Apollo, which is kept in a museum in New Caprica or Lebron. I can't remember. It's one of those places. So and that also speaks to like the human religiosity. Some of the colonies are so post-theistic that the religious artifacts, like these ancient magic that are magic, they are magic, but they're not supernaturally magic, but they're magic in the sense of they're magic for the multiverse that they exist in. They're kept in museums, but she's the one who returns to get it, the arrow of Apollo, which is his obviously namesake, and her call sign is Starbuck. But in fact, she is the more Apollonic character, and she even has a kind of like her look isn't butch, but there is a kind of like butch element to her, where she's kind of like she's very androgynous at times. Like she's very much a woman. There's no question about it. It's just that she does take an androgynous role at times.
She's
So
a
I always,
badass.
yeah, she is a badass. She is a total badass. There's no question about it. And she ends up having like visions of the Eye of Jupiter, which is the name of this episode. She ends up painting the Eye of Jupiter and actually knowing where the original Terran colony Earth is. She's the one who has to lead them. Again, it goes back to sort of that Aeon of the Daughter concept. She's the one who leads humanity back to Earth. It's not. Sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
No. She's also, the Starbuck and Moby Dick. I don't know how big into literature, anybody is, but there's a Starbuck character in Moby Dick, and there's very similar, or you could say complete opposite, like rebellion and duty is very Starbuck in this. Um, her relationship with the captain, the chief antagonist. It's just you can look up. I won't go Moby Dick crazy, but the character in Moby Dick, it's like the creator of Ronald D. Moore, is that it? It's like he took that character and inverted it and made this Starbuck. But
Sorry,
anyway,
there's going to be a dog barking if I have to turn on my mic. No, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Vanessa. I'm sure she sees the deers or something, or fox or whatever it is. But anyways, I'll go get her after. But we'll finish up in 6 minutes. But I think, look, we didn't get through all the Cylons, but I think we covered a lot. I think that we hit on a lot of the major ideas of the world and the politics of it. And this is one of the things I love about this series, is that it gives all of us, including Vanessa, it gives us all something to sort of come at the series, like an angle for which to sort of analyze the series. Like for me, I'm going to look at the Kobol, the sort of Vedic elements, the metaphysics that I recognize, as well as like obviously when they're doing the scrolls of Pythia and she's doing the hallucinogenic Kamala extract, very interesting, which means lotus, but it's a specific kind of lotus. So she is, there's like all these like very, I don't want to say Rig Vedic, but it's like kind of like Vedic, Tantric, Puranic. It's all in there. So there's like, it's a very mixture. It's very theosophical actually. So I love that it has like a metapolitical element for solar. It has the like Olympian or like Orphic component, Platonic component for Eros. It has the nerd sci-fi element for Vanessa, and it really has something for everybody. And I think that's what makes it a really interesting series. And it is imperfect. It's not like a perfect series, but overall, for like a space opera, I personally would give it like really high marks because I think it does really well in what it set out to do. Now, is the Reimagined series as beautiful as Kino, as we often say, as the 1978 version? No. But what it lacks necessarily in aesthetics and visual and production maybe is that it is a very much a human story. It's a very much a story about the sort of secular and religious meeting and how much they're almost inseparable. Like Solar called like Lee's liberalism, Apollo's liberalism, he called it like the secular religion, of course. And that's very much like how after Bush 1 or Bush 2, excuse me, they sort of turned nationalism into a dirty word. That was part of the whole like movement of Bush, was like they were like, oh, we're going to be like hoorah America. But like everybody who had an inclination to like be a more anti-war, anti-empire, like more of those whatever, more of that kind of politics, that made nationalism to be a very dirty word because it was immediately associated with the Iraq war, with like imperialism, with like all of that. And so I don't know, it became like that kind of America became associated with secular religion, but it really was a sort of repositioning of the evangelical or like fundamentalist framework, which I would argue is just literalism. Like literalism, it doesn't matter if it's dressed up in religious framework or modern, postmodern secularist framework. Literalism is for me, I think literalism is the enemy. Because like the humans and the Cylons both later on learn, if you are a fundamentalist, like even the Geminis, they like the whole thing with Alosha. I had this whole thing where, well, we'll get into it next week, but they return to Kobol, and it's all about how the sort of scrolls or the scriptures, they don't relay exactly the story. The maps aren't complete. The prophecies aren't complete. They're very, it's very ambiguous. And sort of that's the religious landscape. Like the ineffable is ineffable. You can't really explain it. You can't really describe it. It is something external to them, but it's not necessarily it's not definable. It's not even containable within their pre-existing frameworks, either group. So anyways, well, Eros just dropped. Hopefully that wasn't anything bad and I didn't okay. Eros is going to view fireworks. Thank you so much, Eros. Everybody check. every I'm just reading the private chat. So funny. Anyways, the going to view fireworks. Thank you to Solar and Eros. Please check out Eros. Her YouTube channel, Solar, his Substack, and also like whatever. I don't even know. He didn't even tell me. He just told me he wrote a poem. I didn't know he was actually submitting it to a lit mag. So I look forward to that. I think that's really cool. And thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm so glad you came up, and hopefully you'll be able to come up for all the BSG episodes, because they kind of are for you too. Like I when people said they were excited, like I was like, okay, well then we can expect all these people to hopefully contribute.
Well, I wasn't going to, but I realized that nobody else had seen the show, so I was like, I'll jump on. But thanks for having me, and yeah, I'll come back for sure.
Awesome. Well, you're always welcome, as is everyone in the lodge who's listening to this, either in recording or live. We've got our numbers back up. I'm really happy about everything, the way the show's been going. It's really great. But everybody check out Vanessa, Truth and Dies. Go to her IG, go to her Etsy, go to her X Twitter, which she says she's never on, but she's always like a click away in the GC. So I'm really I'm happy that we have like such a cohesive and although it's at times intangible because we live in the social media a little bit, but our little crew is pretty cool. So
really, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Vanessa. Obviously, check out Threshold Saints, like and subscribe to the YouTube. This is our MetaMagic show. We transcend space and time, surfing on the Aether wave, archivist, speculative archivist of MetaMagic. And so this is Lords of Kobol, Threshold Saints, plus Ultra presents the Lords of Kobol, the Eye of Jupiter, Ark I of all 3 arcs. So everybody look forward to that. Next week will be the Tomb of Athena. And hopefully we'll get more into Starbuck. We'll get more into the Cylons. We'll get more into the humans. We'll get more into the plot. And hopefully everybody will at least have a couple episodes under their belt. And appreciate everybody for coming. I think that's it. Got lots coming up. Just watch the YouTube channel. I kind of am still freaked out that we have a YouTube channel, but it is interesting. Yeah, it is. It's cool in a way because I like that everything's together. Like I like that the Grey Lodge stuff is there, all our group work, and then I like that Threshold Saints, which obviously all the people that are on the Grey Lodge have played an extensive role in helping me co-create. So it's been a really interesting, greater project, and I appreciate it. And obviously, Vanessa and I became friends because I was able to like continue and have the show. So yeah, it's really cool. So I'll go out saying that. Everybody have a happy and safe 4th of July. Watch fireworks. Obviously, fireworks are the best metaphor for Hode. It is a very Aeon of Hode, not necessarily Hode, but yeah, you can say that if you follow a more OTO sort of vision of reality. It's very like the sparks of splendor. Well, what are sparks of splendor other than colors in the sky? So I think that's a great place to end it. Obviously, go buy Vanessa's tie-dye clothes because, those are also sparks of splendor in their own way.
And Astro elected.
Astro elected. Hell yeah.